Hello, I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost, I'd like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. The topic of this video is going to be on rearranging attitudes for achievement. And so, what I mean by this is that a lot of what I've read when it comes to our psychology is based on the regulation of our emotional states as a means to help better orient our perception to those things which we value and want to achieve most. One thing you can know and understand about your persona per se, or just what you are in terms of what it means for you to exist, is that you are a constellation of drives and emotions. Rather than thinking of these drives and emotions as, I guess, subversive agents that depict what you think at various moments whenever they're engaged or animated or excited, you should know these things as the very basis for the schematization of what you see, understand, and know in the world, why you're motivated to be a certain way at any particular point, state, and time in your life. You are existing on top of a sea of ever flowing and ebbing emotions. Many of these things come from your natural predilections as a certain kind of creature, but nonetheless, there is its own particular constellation and arrangement that comes via your personality. And so there is this landscape with which you should be familiar with in terms of what to think of in terms of using to get yourself to do and be somewhere. This kind of thinking and wisdom comes in its most putrid and disgusting form, and the idea that people can shape or change reality based on what they meditate on and think, or the secret or whatever, that nonsense. But what is true is that all self-help, all religiosity, all of these kinds of theories of metaphysics are things to help regulate our emotional state. Whether that's through the exercise of reason or various ideals that are given to us by the greater voices of the drives that sit at the seat of our cognition and existence. What I mean is, we say beauty is an essential feature of the world because we care about aesthetics as creatures that like symmetry and care about status and sexual selection. Status, sexual selection, and symmetry, and our desire to gain things which we think are good is the matrix for beauty. Whether that lives in a particular emotion or a set of substrates that come together for a particular emotion, that's what allows us to understand beauty. Strength or power comes from our need to exert ourselves in the world in order to achieve what we want. Power can be related to everything from creativity to physical activity, but it is this general need or drive, this need to see ourselves achieve our aims and our goals and to rise up dominance hierarchies, and that drive alone gives us the word and the concept power. Whether or not you want to think of these things as subpersonalities, whether or not you want to think of these things as gods or agents or whatever, the physiology stands to show that there is this landscape of emotion that is directing you in certain ways. Now, can you control this thing completely? No, you can't. But what do I mean in terms of orienting one's ideas about things in order to pursue achievement? Well, quite frankly, the first thing in order to achieve something maybe of great note is that you have to realize that you cannot control yourself. The only thing you can tend to control is your environment and then what your perspective is. I mean, you can't completely control your perspective, and I'm not going to say that you can completely control your perspective, but what you can understand is your perspective is amenable to experience and to however the environment is configured. So, however you configure your environment, what you set up in terms of what you put as your highest values, pictures, photos, and things like that. People talk about dream boards and all these other kinds of sorts of things. All those things are doing is getting your mind to really look for opportunities to try and seize those things in the environment or notice them. It's being something of a primer for a reward mechanism. And what do I mean as a primer for a reward mechanism? Well, if you don't understand the value of something, then you're probably not going to have energy. We're just going to call it energy. I don't mean it from any woo-woo kind of place, but you have to know that your body's choosing each and every moment in terms of what's currently acting on it from the environment to what you did last week or what you had for breakfast, of what it's going to do with its resources, just given what's going on and what's gone on for your history. And so it's going to say, I'm going to store up so much sugar, I'm going to store up so much oxygen, protein, whatever for X, Y, and Z, based on your history and based off of your psychology. Now, why would nature pick to do some of it based off of your psychology? Well, guess what? Because your psychology is in control of everything. That's why. So it's the case that because you never know what environment you're going to be in as a human being, you're never really going to know, because we're socially based creatures, what the hierarchy is going to next choose as a basis for pursuit or something like that. You're kind of like a dog that's having 1,001 balls thrown in different directions. You kind of don't know which way you're going to have to go whatsoever. Now, we've come up with several social inventions such as stability and tradition and culture, stability in history and law and bureaucracy and so on and so forth, to keep that kind of ever so shifting and changing nature of reality at its most limited extent. But the issue is we're still a part of nature, and it's omnipresent and omnipotent, basically. So we can never actually completely fix the thing. The damn thing's always going to be moving, and even your culture is always going to be shifting and changing, because there's just a whole bunch of biology and stuff like that that's innervating us, and impulses and contingencies and things like that are going to shift what's going on in other people. And you just have this whole flux going. Like Heraclitus, I will say the world is always in flux. So because it's like that, your emotions have to be free to regulate you, and they also have to be free to be susceptible to change in whatever is presently pressed on them at some moment. And so you can use the fact that things that are presently and consistently pressed on them tend to take precedence over things that are not consistently frequented or valued. And so that's the way in which you use your psychology to maybe get something. What's something you want, and what's something you know you really value and like. That's how you start getting your emotions on your side. That just by consistently visiting those things. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of. I'm not a self-help person or anything like that, but I guess like my thing is the secular project, and the secular project is honestly to bring greatness back into the world, if I'm being frank. And so, it's just going to be something you need. You need to become the master of your psychology, and the master of your psychology is becoming something of an individual that has dominion over their emotions, because whether or not you think that that's the world or not, that's the thing that colors the world you're going to see. You need to regulate and manipulate. Okay, so that's the first basis. Now, and so habituation, that's the real kind of key to it all. And then the next thing you have to know is preparation, so practice. You're fairly plastic. Neurotypical people are extraordinarily plastic. Even people who aren't neurotypical. I mean, like, there's a lot of different things that would make one not neurotypical, but the damn thing every person can do is learn, because we have this feature of social learning, which is based on phenotypic plasticity, with neuroplasticity being a feature of phenotypic plasticity, a sub class of plasticity that belongs to the biological feature of phenotypic plasticity. And phenotypic plasticity is something that's a fundamental feature of a lot of animals and mammals and so on and so forth. Just it happens to be the case that because our brain is most salient for our survival in terms of the little simian games we like to play. It's the case that that gets a lot of our nervous system. I mean, a lot of things. Everything works like this for the most part, but it just tends to localize itself in the brain in a certain kind of way that's noticeable, and which we like because we like intelligence and all, and intellectual achievement and things like that. So we care about neuroplasticity, but just know it's a feature of your cognition, and so you can learn things. The best thing to say is that you need to master domains and spaces, like practice, 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 practice. And when I say practice, I mean stand on the edge of your abilities. And when I mean stand on the edge of your abilities, I mean pick things, specific targets, things that you know you would need to do in order to be X, Y, and Z, and seek to do them, and always do things that you can't do. And a general principle, something I tell myself is I'm going to do the hardest thing today that I possibly can do. What's the hardest thing that I currently can do? Not impossible for me, but I can't do it. It's just like it's not impossible for me to do it right now, but I can't do it. That's what you go for each and every day. Now, is that space a fun space to spend time in? Is it really exactly the can you keep your so personality honestly is going to play into this, but can you keep that momentum going? That's what the regulation of your emotions is for, because to be frank, most of your emotional makeup is going to be something that's running on a certain kind of pain pleasure principle, and it's also going to be something that's mediated by how much reward you receive for something. And reward could be everywhere, everything from, if people noticing you getting a bonus on your paycheck, moving to a new city, given a new opportunity, something. So it's like whatever reward is going to really depend on the individual and like what their personality is motivated by per se. But there's a case that in order for you to receive those things, unless you're in a particularly fortunate circumstance, you're not going to be rewarded for much of what you're doing when you first start doing something. And so when it comes to exactly how it is you manipulate your emotional space, because that's what you're doing. I mean, even if that sounds, negative, that's what you're doing, independent of all the woo-woo language that goes on with these kinds of discussions, but you're manipulating your emotional space. And so you're going to manipulate your emotional space through the habituative nature of emotions tending to circle around what's most frequently prized that they consistently come into contact with. It's why people develop funny practices and rituals and things, and so why athletes have superstitions and things like that. The reason why they have those superstitions is because those superstitions or those consistent practices are means to regulate their emotional responses. And it's why even negative emotions are something that's useful to an athlete or somebody who's trying to do something in terms of high performance. Some people, if they don't experience butterflies, they can't actually do it. If they feel dead and they're not excited, they can't do what they are doing. Now, why is that? It's just because they have a certain psychology that's set up in a certain way, and they habituated certain actions over time, and thus you get a certain kind of emotional regulation. You have to keep what Daniel Coyle calls your windshield full. And, what's your windshield? You're an aspirational kind of thing. You want stuff, you have to remind your mind what you want, because you're something that's very much so predicated on your environment instructing you, and a kind of cultural space instructing you to get or do something. So one of the craziest things about the 21st century is that there aren't all of these different institutions telling you what to get and what to pursue. So there aren't all these gods, there aren't all these statues of gods and what do you call them, rosaries and different religious art and things depicted on city walls. There's not like praying in schools or whatever. There is not a external matrix hemming you in and seizing your mind to tell it what's important to pursue. So it's really hard for you to organize yourself, but because it's the case that it's been external forces organizing ourselves for centuries in history. I mean, well, for most centuries, for almost all of history, it's hard for us to understand right now when it comes to getting one to do something. You do have to use the same kind, because that's just the kind of creature you are for whatever odd reason. I don't know. But, evolutionarily wise, I don't know exactly why, but you do have to use those things. You do have to use that same kind of setup and matrix to manipulate your emotions. It is just about manipulating your emotions. You need to put yourself in a space where those things are often presented to you, and you need to view and watch people that inspire you to be a particular sort of something. And that's all you can do. The reason why you need to do that is because you need to get the emotions on your side. If you try to do something in the world and your emotions are not on your side, it is very, very difficult. That's just true. That's why you're not the master of your own house, or you don't control yourself, but you can manipulate yourself. Now, this whole thing about manipulating your subconscious and all that stuff, I don't know about that. I mean, like, people send me funny videos and articles and things all the time. Like, what do you think about this? It's like, God, I don't know, man. Like, it's like, I'm not into mysticism and things like that. But I can tell you in terms of those things what the neuroscience can tell me and what psychology can tell me. And I mean to say that fundamentally you're an emotional creature who is very plastic, who can adapt themselves to being better aligned with achieving a certain outcome. The more they introduce certain psychological stimuli into their life and habituate themselves to that stimuli. So, I mean, if you're open, this is kind of harder to do than for other people, because if you're like me, you need a new figure all the goddamn time. Like, you need somebody like a new figure all the time. I mean, sometimes, the same things don't work all the time for me. And that's just because, for whatever reason, novelty is something that I seek. And so I need new people or new excitements and things like that to keep my emotional tank running and springing forward. It's why even with mathematics and physics, I wane off, I go back on. I wane off, I go back on. Wax on, wax off, young Danielson. But that's basically what my activity is because, well, man, like, keeping the emotions running in that direction is not always easy because I'm not always motivated, so I struggle with motivation myself. Which is why I know these things to some extent too, because I mean, I'm always trying to emotionally manipulate myself to get myself in line with the things that I know that I want. So, also, too, you have to understand, like, your emotions live in that part of yourself that doesn't have voice and it doesn't have rationalistic driving. Your prefrontal cortex does not mean a goddamn thing to your mid and your lower brain. I hate to break that to you, but it just doesn't mean anything to it. You have to look at it like this. Your prefrontal cortex, or your rational-centric mind, sees this thing up in front as the little mouthy midget. It's a mass. This thing back here, this thing under here, it is a massive, temperamental and sophisticated animal that will smack this little mouthy thing so quickly it's not even funny. It's just like, you don't want to underestimate why people put so much religious significance into it or mystical significance into it is understandable, but from a psychological and physiological standpoint, your subconscious is your emotional space. And that's really what you're trying to get to follow along with you. And when you don't feel like doing something, you don't feel like going to work, you don't feel like whatever, you don't feel like doing things that are in your best interest, or you want to behave badly, it's just because you got a tiff of emotions that are swirling around and saying, that goal you have for us up here, we do not give two shits about it back here. And guess what? You want to know who controls you? I am in charge. Why am I in charge? Because I'm what keeps you alive. That's why. Every bit of what actually maintains you in terms of why does even your heart, that's something that's taken care of by your autonomic nervous system, but your autonomic and sympathetic nervous system all innervate from your spine back up to the lower stem of your brain, and there's conversation, very slight, every so slightly conversation, but none you can actually control. Similar for your arousal and various other things, or waking up. It's not anything you're going to be able to control. You can manipulate it, but you can't control it. It's just not there. Why? Because it's very old architecture, and you're not smart enough. Basically, you'd probably kill yourself. And so how we are able to be conscious, operating, achieving things is by having a whole large portion of us that is unconscious and self-sufficient in a lot of ways. And it's smart enough to say, look, goddammit, if you won't give me food, I'll get food for myself. It will just usurp your rational brain, and then you're going to find yourself mulling around in your refrigerator for, Haagen-Dazs ice cream, your freezer or something for Haagen-Dazs ice cream at 2 in the morning. You're like, why the hell am I doing this? That's honestly with somebody with a little amount of habituated actions, action patterns and potentials that sit on the surface of their, I guess, like, alright, oh yeah, so that's somebody who has poor discipline, let's just put it like that. And what is discipline, damn it? Okay, let's talk about discipline, because it's just habituation, man, that's what discipline really is. But you cannot habituate yourself to the same things in terms of the process of trying to be great or achieve things. That's just not the case. You habituate yourself to like a certain general set of actions and like specific activities, but it's the case like, so what do I mean? Like, if you, math is the easiest thing for me, like, so because I do it so often, I'll use it as an example. I need to know algebra, and I need to know geometry, and I need to know trigonometry for calculus, but after a certain point in time, when algebra and geometry and trigonometry stop being challenging for me, I need to stop doing it and do the calculus. Once the calculus stops being challenging the first semester, I gotta go into Calc 2, I have to go into Calc 3, I have to go into vector calculus, I have to go into differential equations, I have to go into linear algebra, I have to go into abstract algebra, I have to go into number theory, I have to go on, and so on and so on and so on and so forth. And I always have to go to the highest tier and degree of those things in order for me to get the greatest degree of instantiation in terms of a set of habits. So whenever you're looking at something like, say you want to be a mathematician, or say you want to be a physicist, or say you want to be a musician, what you're asking yourself to do is to habituate yourself to a certain set of action potentials. Whenever you look at somebody's personality or persona or character, that's what I should say, you're looking at a set of habituated action potentials. Some of them got there just randomly, because we have personalities in early childhood environments, and some of those things just get programmed into us unbeknownst, and we're stuck with them for the rest of our lives, basically. Unless they're so maladaptive that we have to go to some kind of intervening process like therapy or something, and receive counseling for our early childhood trauma and so on and so forth. But that's basically that's the thing you're looking at. You are a sum of action potentials, or not action potentials, but action patterns. Doing a series of actions is what it means for you to be someone or something in the world. It doesn't mean that, that's not all that you are, but that's all you're trying to pay attention to whenever you're trying to actually achieve things. You're not really trying to pay attention to yourself as the emotional kind of creature you are. You're only trying to manipulate your emotions. That's it. And so you can manipulate your emotions more easier when you have certain schematizations of actions already laid on top of like what you tend to prefer to do or to be or something like that. And so, yeah, practice, man. So, I mean, like, I don't know how, you can, I guess you guys can tell me how clear this advice is coming across, but I guess, like, to put it concretely, if you know, say for example, you know you want to be a physicist, then you should look at physics every goddamn day. I mean, you should pick a patron saint physicist. Pick some physicist that you really like. You say, I like this guy's personality or this gal's personality, and she really jives with me. And you read everything that they've done. You read their biography, everything like that, and you just say, I want to be that person. I just want to be that person. I want to be that person. You do that before you do any homework or anything like that. Then you go and do your homework and you do all your practice and stuff. And you do everything as hard as you possibly can. You do the hardest things always, no matter what. You just do the hardest things. Everything nobody else wants to do it. Why? Because the masses are vulgar. Never trust them. Never trust what the mass of people do because they're just vulgar. They don't understand what greatness is and what some people say about luck is something that comes to those who are prepared, and what the vulgar call luck is a characteristic or a trait, or what the vulgar call luck is something that great people master. Great people master luck, and what the vulgar call luck is a characteristic of brilliance or genius. That's a saying from Napoleon, and what that's all to me is this: like, look, don't ever do what they're doing. Like, don't, like, don't look at somebody, even if they're in the same boat as you per se. If they're not going where you're going, just ignore them for the most part, unless you see something advantageous that serves your interests and prerogatives. Like, one of the biggest things that was annoying for me going through my first physics course was I was studying things, and people would say to me, like, why are you studying that? That's not going to be on the test, or that's not necessary. They're not going to ask you for that. Look, goddamn it, I don't give a fuck. Like, it's like I'm not doing this to, like, pass a test. It's like I'm doing this to actually understand whatever it is I'm doing, and I'm also doing it to be great. Like, look, man, it's about my glory, not about what's going to be on a test. Like, have some self-interest in the sense, like, in the sense that you have to want to be something glorious. That's not to say be arrogant or something like that, but it is to say, like, fuck people, man. Like, like, being great. Now, I'm not saying, like, fuck people in the sense I don't care about people, but, look, you gotta know who and what to care about. And the massive expectations that people tend to have, or the masses and their expectations. Let's talk about the masses and their expectations. So the masses. Who are the masses? The masses aren't necessarily just neurotypical people or average people. The masses are people that, they're the masses, hell, high IQ people can be a part of the masses, other creative people or people in creative occupations can be in the masses. I'm like, writers should know this. Like, if you try to, say for example, you're a writer and you want to publish, your book, and you're trying to get your book published or something like that. Look, if that goddamn editor, or the head of that publishing company, or whoever's reading the fucking manuscript, doesn't like what you could have written, like, the greatest story in all of American literature or Western literature, but if they don't like your character in the sense, like, they don't get along with them, or they don't like the central message of the book, they're not going to publish the goddamn thing, and so they're a part of the masses in the sense that what they're controlled and what they're governed by is their taste. They're lazy in the sense, like, so this is what lazy means from an achievement standpoint. They're controlled by their tastes, their comfort, their familiarity, and whatever histories that they know or understand or have been indoctrinated to think is valuable. All of this causes them to be lazy, and by lazy it means that they don't want to pay attention, and they want to put no effort towards things that are novel or outside of the framework of their familiarity or their center of competence or comfort. So that's what lazy means from this standpoint. And that's what puts people in the masses. Everybody in the mass is just a lazy person. Impossibility and what other... And let's talk about impossible, because most people don't know what possible is. Why don't most people know what possible is? Because most people don't understand themselves, and they don't understand reality. That's not to say that anything's possible. I'm not a fool like that. I'm not saying that at all. But don't be so sure that people are telling you the truth. Just don't think that. What people are telling you are various things that have to do with their own emotional, psychological makeup. And so trying to argue for this thing or that thing, or trying to give them credence. And it doesn't mean that they're malicious or anything like that, but you have to just chalk them up to the masses. And the greatness is wherever the masses are not. You will only, wherever the masses are, greatness is absent. It's just always true. It is always the case that you do the hardest freaking daring thing. Okay, so let's talk about the Ubermensch for a second, because this is where some of this is coming from. One of the characteristics of the Ubermensch is that the Ubermensch will be willing to exert themselves. You have to have this idea, and where does this come from? Nietzsche is a very elusive thinker in many ways, because people don't know why he's saying what he's saying. So take Alexander the Great, for example. Alexander the Great, man, worked at the front lines of his army. He was always injured and wounded and things like that in battle. He was nearly killed twice in several instances and occasions, and he marched his army for miles on year-long, month-long campaigns, and was willing to waste himself and exhaust himself. Did he have some self-destructive habits and things like that? Yes, but the principal way that he lived his life was through self-exertion. And self-exertion for what? The glory of man, or his glory. It's like, why would the Ubermensch be willing to exert themselves? Or is exertion a part of it? And why exertion has to be a fundamental aspect of you? Just period, if you want to achieve things. There is no telling where success lives. There's no telling what opportunity is going to really put you over the edge that makes it such that there's some kind of really positive feedback loop that vaults you to wherever it is you're trying to go. There's no telling, man. And you just have to, and I guess too, because there are so many different kinds of social and cultural blockers that will always be in your way, or conventions that live within the minds and psychology of other people that will act as blockades to you and your goals. You just have to be willing to exert yourself. You can't care necessarily about preserving yourself. That's just something that has to come with the deal. But in order for you to do that, you have to get your emotions on your side. And that's the one thing that, all great people do have. Nietzsche would talk about a sublimating goal and drive and so on and so forth, and that's why I started with that example with the physics. You pick a person or something that communicates a certain set of goals, something you want to be, and then you do the work. You exert in all hopelessness, in the sense of this. You don't know if it's going to get you anything. This is the one thing that I have to say about all of this. You don't know where it's going to get you, and you don't know if it's going to get you anything. That's why you just have to be willing to exert, because who's telling what you're ultimately going to have to become in order to achieve anything of reputability? And it's the case that in your pursuit of reputability, and reputability in terms of what, you definitely select that, but if you want to be great, it's in the ages. Somebody should outshine Melville. Somebody should outshine Shakespeare. Somebody should outshine Dickens or Tolstoy. Dostoevsky. Somebody's got to do it, man. Right now, Napoleon has this line where he's this quote where he says, in our age, in our times, people have no true conception of greatness, so I will be an example for them. That's kind of what you have to think about our time. the thing about whatever it is you're going to do, and so on and so forth, people aren't going to understand it. People aren't going to know what to do with it. Some people might, some people may value it and so on and so forth, but for the most part, man, you have to want to be glorious in the sense that you have to stride the world like a colossus and be happy when people hate you, man, like, or when they don't like you, like it's like positive emotion. Everybody loves me. Fuck happiness, like happiness and achievement and greatness don't have any correlation, okay? Like, there's something else that lives there. I'm not saying that people who like those sorts of things, they shouldn't, pursue happiness or something like that. But happiness and pleasure have an connectedness that, makes it such that there's no saying that you can't be happy or anything like that. But I would say this, like, Napoleon, he has this other quote where he said on his deathbed, to die is nothing, but to live every day without achievement and glory is to die every day. And, it's to die constantly. And sorry, I didn't get that perfectly right. To die constantly. And what that's supposed to be or mean, or in terms of its significance, is that this will to exert and this need to, you have to be willing to exhaust yourself for some personal glory. You have to stake personal glory as the highest thing. It doesn't mean you have to be a bad player. It doesn't mean that you have to be Machiavellian, and it doesn't mean that you have to necessarily be what people consider, arrogant. But damn it, be prideful. Fuck people say you shouldn't be prideful. To hell with the masses, man. Like, don't let anything, I don't care what your religion is or anything like that, don't let it tell you who you are. Don't let it tell you what to be. Constantine was Christian. It's like, like, if you want to think about it like that, I guess, like, you're always going to have your own sort of flavor or your own kind of bent, something that's just doesn't allow you to jive with the present order and convention of now. And in order for you to do that, you really need to get your emotions on your side. That's the bottom line, because let's be frank. Like, most people like it when people like them. Most people don't like it when people don't like them. Most people take things personally. Most people are afraid of losing things rather than gaining things. And, to some extent, you're going to be like that to various degrees. I can say for myself, like, before I ever started being a mathematician and a physicist, I was a wrestler and a jiu-jitsu player. And I had some pretty good success at wrestling and jiu-jitsu. And then I injured my right knee, and I had to stop being a wrestler and a jiu-jitsu player. My greatest aspirations were to go to the 2016 Olympics as a wrestler for the United States. There would have been a relatively long process in order for that to happen, but I was en route of pursuing those things from the standpoint of getting my life organized in such a way that I had the opportunity to pursue those things. And I had spent at least 7.5 years being a serious athlete, in the sense of training at least 4 times a day, 6 times a week. Like, if anybody were to say I wasn't a dedicated athlete or a workaholic, it just wasn't true. That's what I was. And for a long time, and many of the people that surrounded me in my life, myself and them, were pretty convinced that at some point in time I was going to get the things that I was aiming for. It was just about getting the right opportunity. I was at that state where I had all the right skill, I was talented, and I guess I had the right kind of presence and things like that on the mat, and the right kind of attitude and mindset. I had really become, for the most part, what I needed to become in order to achieve the things, or to get the opportunity to get the further opportunities to achieve the things that I wanted to achieve. That was a possibility. Then I injured my right knee, and I was like, damn, like, it sucked, it really sucked, and I lost all of that virtue and value that I built up as that person, and almost all of the knowledge and things like that I had. Well, not all of it, because I was into neuroscience and psychology and art and things like that even then, but still, I wasn't really a serious mathematician or a physicist or anything like that at that time. And so all of those things, obviously the psychology and neuroscience and the art and things like that stuck around in my life, but most of the apparatus of who I was as an individual was in what I did, and that was it. And once it was gone, it was gone. And so I became very gun shy, per se. It's like, even making this YouTube, even doing this YouTube channel, I didn't want to do this at first. My friend Jake encouraged me to share my ideas on YouTube just because we were having a lot of philosophical discussions and talks about personality and things like that. And he was watching some personality videos on YouTube and things like that. And he was like these people are pretty bad, man. You could do a better job than they could. You should do it. He's an INTJ, so he would say something like that. And so with that encouragement and things like that, I got on to YouTube, and I've done things like compete in math competitions and things like that in high school. It took me some, not high school, college, and so it took me, but it took me time to get back on that horse, and it's taken me time to even willing to be ready to put this attitude back onto myself. This is the kind of attitude I had that got me to the place where I was ready to become someone and something, even right now, maybe if there's enough of the population there. I'm not sure. People flitting in and out of jiu-jitsu gyms, but even at the gym I was at before I stopped training, I was a legend. I was a freaking legend, because they just hadn't seen anything like me, for a long time, because when I say I was good, I took it very serious. I was good. And so it's not like that way of being is exactly the easiest thing to do. And whenever it's the case that you're not rewarded for it, then you're just going to be like, what the hell? And you're going to become a nihilist and everything like that and say there's no point to anything. But exertion, that's why it has to characterize your existence and your being. You don't always know what's going to work out for you, and you don't always know where something is going to get you ultimately and in the long run. But I can say that, well, you can live life two ways, man. Well, there's multiple ways you can live life, but I'm just going to simplify it to this for the point of the conversation. You can either be the greatest thing you possibly can conceive of in being at every single instance and point in your life, or you can settle for something else. Maybe settling for something else is what you really value. But if you're a person, and people know who they are, people know who they are, whether or not it's something that expresses itself in the jealousy you have towards other people, whether or not it's embedded in the fact that you're resentful about where you are or your lot in life, it's the case that those emotions are telling you, whether indirectly or directly, you just need to be as great as you possibly can be. If you're this kind of person. If you're this kind of person, there's no way you can settle for anything less. And it's not about necessarily what you ultimately matter up to in terms of the eyes of other people. It's about what you produce. It's about the actual work you come up with and how you live your life. It's about not only... So, yes, it's about achievement. You want to achieve as much as you can. You want to produce as much work as you can, honestly. That's really what it's about. Exhaust yourself. That's what you want to do. Burn yourself up. That's what you want to do. And then leave it to history or to maybe to other people to decide what's good or not about what you do. And then from there, it's also just about being a model to other people because, maybe people don't have the right ideas or understanding or experience or something like that. And perhaps that's just what you can inspire in another person, because people are locally referential, so you never know who's paying attention to you and who's, taking what you're saying to heart, or the way you're being or something like that. You don't know. And so be great, just dare to do it, man. Because honestly, the world, in terms of what it is made from the efforts and ideas of other human beings, and there's no reason you shouldn't put yourself in that mix, because a lot of it was happenstantial in the first place, and the potential that we have in terms of this day and age, in terms of our educational methods and technology and things like that. If people really dare to be great, my God, what we could really do. But first, it starts with the individual, and I guess just to say that ultimately, you need to get your emotions on your side. Change and arrange your environment insofar as it making it something that's conducive to reminding you of your goals. Hang out with the right kinds of people. Watch the right kinds of things and read the right kind of books, and practice. Be patient and exert yourself. Always do the hardest thing that you can and revel in the pain and the glory. So that's my video, and thank you for watching.